Fire Emblem Fates is a hot garbage train wreck, and I absolutely love it. I just wish I could say that without the 15 caveats involved in explaining any guilty pleasure, and I think I'm getting off topic. What was this video supposed to be about? The writing of Fates is bad, which is a shame because the game actually has some pretty good underlying characters and themes that could easily make for a really compelling story had the game just had better writers. It's kinda similar to the Star Wars prequels where, yeah, it's obviously bad, but you can see that there's actually some good ideas behind it. The failure mostly falls in the execution of those ideas. So that's what I'm gonna be attempting to fix today. We're gonna fix FE Fates. So first and foremost, this is more of an edit of the Fates script. I'm not writing an entirely new story with these characters, and I'm not rewriting every individual line. I'm also going to try and make minimal changes to the maps because while gameplay and story are inherently integrated, I'm coming at this with the mindset of a writer given the maps and the task of connecting them coherently. Finally, this video is only going to be covering the prologue. The different routes will all get their own videos, mostly because I don't want to spend 3 weeks making a 2-hour video that no one is going to watch because it's a 2-hour video made by a dude whose greatest accomplishment thus far is coloring the hair of the Chad face blue. Getting on with the actual video, the most glaring issue with Fates is that the choice in Chapter 6 is just not a real choice. Emotionally speaking, the player doesn't really have a reason to side with Nohr over Hoshido. The Hoshidans clearly have the moral upper hand, and the main reason Corrin has for picking Nohr, the player doesn't really get to experience. Also, as a side note, I'm going to be referring to Corrin as a she in this video because that's the version of the avatar that I used. Corrin was raised in Nohr as royalty. She has a deep emotional bond to who she believes is her siblings and is grateful to have such a loving family. At least that's what we're told. You see, Fates has this tiny little issue where it tries to be really subtle in how it shows us things. Like, honestly, I don't know how they expected us to be prepared for Garon turning out to be an evil monster. Like, the foreshadowing is super blink and you miss it. Yeah, we're talking about Garon. Garon is an evil warmonger with decrepit gray skin who constantly berates, at best, the player over the slightest disobediences. Like, he's the kind of guy who just sits in his room laughing maniacally for no real reason. And the main trade-off for siding with him is that you get to stick with the people who begrudgingly bail you out when he threatens to execute you? This is supposed to be an impossible decision, right? There's two main things I do to fix this. First, we need to tweak Garon's personality a bit, and second, make some minor adjustments to the early maps. As for Garon's personality, instead of making his entire character just be evil, characterize him as a sort of mama bear type, where he's warm and compassionate to his family and cold and ruthless to anyone opposing him. You see, we don't actually have to tone down his genocidal tendencies as long as we make him a likable mass murderer. When Corrin refuses to execute the prisoners, have him move the job to Leo or Xander and then pull Corrin aside and say, hey, I know this is hard for you, but those are the enemy, and if you don't kill the enemy, they'll just come back and kill you. Corrin could even push back and Garon could calmly refute her, saying that she's naive and that she could use some real-world experience. Now, you can still have the moment where Leo goes against orders for Corrin's sake, and on top of that, we can reframe the mission where Corrin is investigating the border as a training opportunity instead of a punishment. Just have Corrin's orders be to capture the fort through any means necessary. Corrin can try negotiating, but when it clearly isn't working, Hans can step in and be like, "Dah." The second main change I'd make would occur on this map as well. Instead of having the Nohr Royals showing up in a cutscene, make it so that when Corrin seizes the fort, Hoshidan reinforcements come pouring in, and the objective suddenly changes to rout. Then you can have the Nohr Royals show up in gameplay, one at a time, hunting by daybreak style. Then you can show them making quick work of those reinforcements, as well as any enemies you might have missed while seizing, as green units. This would help the player feel a bit more connected to these characters, since otherwise the Nohr Royals would only show up as red units in the prologue, and that's the thing that bad guys do. And we're not the bad guys.
We are your family.
And this makes a good segue to the next big problem with the prologue, Garon's plan. You see, the whole prologue, as well as Corrin's entire life up to that point, was actually orchestrated by King Garon in service of one goal: killing Lady Mikoto and getting rid of the magical barrier protecting Hoshido. Ignoring the incredible amount of foresight that would take, let's actually go through the events of Garon's plan just to give you an idea of how little sense it actually makes. So, Garon gives Corrin a very obviously evil cursed sword, and then sends Hans with her on a mission to capture the Hoshidan fort, but tells Hans to knock Corrin into the bottomless canyon. Now, we don't know this at this point in the game, but at the bottom of the canyon is actually Vala, a dead kingdom ruled by an ancient dragon that Garon knows about for reasons that we'll cover in a future video. But Lilith, a maid that was actually a dragon that Corrin found and nursed back to health as a child, reveals her true form, turning into a dragon, flying down into the bottomless canyon and teleporting Corrin to a different dimension. Then Lilith teleports Corrin back to where they originally were before she started falling into the canyon, but a Hoshidan warrior named Rinka knocks her out and brings her back to Hoshida, where they treat her like royalty because she's actually a Hoshidan princess and don't even take the obviously evil sword away from her when she gets to the capital. Then an evil shadow demon guy from Vala appears and makes the sword explode, causing Mikoto to jump in front of the debris, sacrificing herself to save Corrin. Couple problems with that plan. Did Garon know about Lilith? What was the plan if Corrin actually ended up in Vala? Every time we see Corrin go to Vala later, shadow demons try to murder her. What if the shadow demons just murdered her? Was she supposed to meet Azura in Vala? Does Garon know that Azura visits Vala often? None of that even matters because you don't need any of that. No alternate dimensions or secret dragons or cursed evil swords. He could have just as easily have Hans betray Corrin in a different manner, knock her out, tie her up, and then leave her somewhere where the Hoshidans would obviously find her. The Hoshidans are characterized as being noble and honorable, so it wouldn't even be a leap to assume that they wouldn't just kill a defenseless person even if that person was technically an enemy. And if you really want to give Garon deniability, you can have Hans and Corrin get separated from everyone else and surrounded. That way Hans's actions can be interpreted as self-preservation as opposed to the active malice following the orders of King Garon. The next big problem is the exploding sword. It's clunky and it isn't really necessary. I know it serves as foreshadowing for Vala, but it gets in its own way and doesn't even make that much sense. If this dude can just appear in Hoshido and then make the sword explode, why didn't he just stab Mikoto like 20 years ago? Was he in the sword? Is he the sword? None of this is even needed anyways. When talking about the Faceless, Hinoka tells Corrin that they were made as a way of bypassing the barrier thing that makes soldiers lose the will to fight since they're mindless and have no will of their own. It's just kind of a one-off thing to justify their existence, but what if that was actually the point? What if that was incorporated into the story? We don't need a middleman to kill Mikoto. Why not just have Corrin do the dirty work herself? And if you haven't picked up on what exactly I'm talking about by this point, I'm talking about Corrin's dragon form that basically has no plot relevance at all. Now, it's never exactly stated what causes the transformation, but given the two examples in the game being moments of characters undergoing very extreme stress, I'm just gonna say that the transformation is brought upon by stress. Mikoto talks about how the Hoshidan throne has magic powers that can restore memories and wants to reform and all that, and Corrin just kind of says, thanks, but nah. Now, this is just kind of an obvious setup for the ending of Conquest, but why not make it significant now? Garon arguably knows that Corrin is a dragon, so if he knows that the trigger is stress, having Corrin be captured by the Hoshidans and suddenly regaining her memories would be a feasible enough trigger for her transformation. Once the transformation completes, Corrin goes on a mindless rampage, killing Mikoto in the process. And at that point, Yukimura can order the soldiers to put down Corrin, and the siblings get into a conflict about it. You can have Ryoma and Takumi plus Yukimura get into a fight, where Ryoma doesn't want them to kill Corrin, but Takumi is fueled by emotional rage and Yukimura is acting out of pragmatism. Replace the Vala shadow demons with Hoshidan soldiers, and the map stays basically the same on the surface, but now carries a bit more emotional weight with it. Plus, Ryoma defending Corrin can lead to two very different character arcs and connotations based on which side Corrin chooses, but that's for another day. For now, we have Azura finally showing up to the fight to save Corrin. At this point, the original version has the Yato emerge from the destroyed statue. Yukimura tells everyone that Mikoto knew everything was going to happen and put it there, which I don't even want to get into how stupid that is on how many levels that is. So all I'll say is that it doesn't have to be part of some master plan. It's a prophecy sword. Use an earlier scene to establish it as being there with nobody able to free it, and then have it start glowing when Corrin returns to normal human form. Corrin can walk up and pull it out with ease. And if you're thinking that's cliche, you're right. But cliches exist because they work. And now we're back at the Branch of Fate, but now we should have the player experiencing the intended emotion. Corrin is directly responsible for the death of Mikoto, making the player feel a bit of an obligation to Hoshido, but they also have a better connection to Nohr. Yukimura and Takumi tried to kill Corrin, plus there's no way Garon could have planned all this out. Right? And what's the right decision? Well, that's up to you. And that's where I kind of want to leave things off for today. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. Please comment if you like my changes or not, or if you'd handled this differently. Those who have already followed me for a while should know that I'm usually pretty talkative in the comments, and I'd love to get a discussion going. Anyways, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled FE7 videos after this one. I just really wanted to get these ideas out of my head and into somewhere on the internet, so thanks. Goodbye.